My name is Cody Turner. I'm a postdoc in the Philosophy Department in the Applied Ethics Center. And today, Dr. Gamze Yilmaz will be joining us giving a talk entitled Reimagining the Communication Classroom, Experiments and Insights in AI-Enhanced Pedagogy. Dr. Yilmaz is an associate professor of communication at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Her research focuses on cognitive and behavioral processes and language use on social media and the impact of pedagogical innovations on student learning. And in this talk, she's going to share her insights on integrating AI-enhanced learning activities and assignments across 3 communication courses. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Hi guys, thanks a lot for the introduction. As Cody mentioned, I've been practicing and studying pedagogical innovations for a while now, and I think AI is a natural extension of my interest and passion in that field. So I definitely benefited from my previous experiences with creative learning or design thinking or flipped classroom techniques and tried to find different ways of integrating AI into my own courses. So again, as I mentioned in the description, I want to share some of the experiments. I like calling these experiments I do. Because we don't really have much data on the efficacy of any of these. I don't like to use the word best practices. I don't know if they're the best practices, but they're what we have. So today I would like to share some of the strategies and actionable practices for AI integrations in my own classes. I also want to share some of my own observations and insights based on communication students' perceptions and use of AI. And finally, I've been conducting an experimental study on students' perceptions and reactions to AI versus human instructors. And I want to share some of the preliminary findings. And I am assuming we have a lot of philosophers in the classroom, so I want to leave you guys with some questions, more questions than answers at the end, and maybe we can have a discussion. So before we get started, I want to ask you guys, how do you define your relationship with AI? If you were to use a verb or an adjective, do you love it? Is it a love-hate? Is it a toxic relationship? Are you hiding from it? Are you embracing it? If you were to take 20 seconds to reflect on it, what would you say? Yeah?
Ambivalent.
Ambivalent? Okay. What else? Yes?
Compatible co-presence.
Huh? Compatible co-presence. I love that.
Outrage skepticism.
Outrage skepticism. It's all good. Anyone else?
Enthusiastic beginner.
Enthusiastic beginner. These are all great ways of describing. I think it's the first step we want to take. We want to kind of like reflect on how we feel about AI. And I think as educators, we may all have very kind of complicated feelings. I definitely will say I engage with AI. I like using that, and I'm cautiously curious about AI's potentials and how it may, disrupt student learning, but also how it may contribute to, student learning. That's why I think it's really important to experiment with these tools to understand, how we can benefit from it, and also how or in what ways we need to be careful about incorporating those. So as I want to give a little bit of a background about me being here. I think almost a couple months ago, I was invited to this discussion about, our university's approach to AI by the technology department. And then I met James there, and I learned about Applied Ethics Center and all the amazing work you guys have been doing here. And I was complaining about how we are all working in silos, and I want to connect with people. And then as I was, incorporating AI into my own work, I found you guys' white paper on emerging technologies and higher education. I think this code here from this paper kind of summarizes a lot of the sentiments in the classroom. In this room. So we definitely need to adapt to this evolution. AI is not going anywhere. It's gonna get, if anything, it's gonna get better, and it's gonna be more integrated into our everyday lives, into the classroom. But I think how we do it is up to us. We definitely need to be intentional and strategic about it, and I think it's good to be critical and skeptical as we're engaging with these tools. So as I talk about how I integrate AI into my own teaching practices, I also want to point out some of the connections they made to this paper, especially some of the recommendations for what instructors can do when they are integrating AI into their own classrooms. And I was happy to see that I was doing those, but I also want to share with you what those recommendations may look like in real life. So I'm going to talk about three main things and how I kind of implement these three strategies in my own classes. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the need for shifting the discourse around AI use. So this is a really big one because since AI, became very disruptive in our teaching and learning experiences, most of the faculty members talk about AI as a means for academic misconduct, which is true to some degree that integration of AI definitely reshaped the accessibility of plagiarism and ease of plagiarism. That's true, but unfortunately, shaping the discourse around academic misconduct also leads us as faculty members to engage in sort of unethical practices. So I used to also feel like they shouldn't use AI, and I was like thinking about this AI detection tool. So I found myself constantly policing students for whether they use AI or not in their writing. So this definitely, I think, harms our relationship with students. We start to always approach them from a very skeptical approach, and we engage in these unethical surveillance practices. I'm sure there are a lot of experts in this room, but you also know that there are no reliable AI detection technologies as of today, even though they are making more progress. Google has been conducting this research on watermarking technologies like synth IDs, but even when you look at the details of it, they're far from being effective or scalable at this point. And I hear that a lot of faculty members are, and when you look at the market, there are tons of products about AI detection. Unfortunately, with this kind of market and professors feeling kind of desperate, and we may want to use those kind of tools, but that's really not the way forward, and we need to reshape that discussion. So one way I approach this is framing AI as a co-intelligence system and trying to find ways to normalize ethical AI use in the classroom and try to lead with trust. We can discuss the efficacies of these, definitely strategies. But again, as I mentioned before, without doing more, I think empirical research, it's hard to know how effective they are. They're just like ways of me trying to shift the discourse towards a little bit more productive, more trust-based discussion. And I want to share some ideas for how I do that. And again, on this right-hand side, you see some of the recommendations from Emerging Tech and Higher Ed white paper. And they recommended that students should be required to explain how they use GPTs to complete assignments, but also instructors should be required to specify their expectations. So it's about how they want them to use AI, both at the course and assignment level. I really like this specificity because I personally do that in my courses, because I think it's very important coming up with policies, but also discipline-specific, course-specific policies are very important. I think AI has different implications for different fields. Maybe in an engineering, course, it will be adopted differently, but in an English or philosophy or sociology course, they're going to be adopted differently, and they will have different outcomes or impacts on learning outcomes. So in my own classes, for my classes, I created AI use policy. When you pretty much look at it, students are allowed to use AI, but I also specify that it's going to be case by case. So throughout the semester, I constantly revisit this policy as I introduce assignments. I even have within the assignments, sometimes I point out which questions or which parts of the assignments I want them to use AI and how they should use AI. And I also ask them to use AI disclosure policy. I think that's a good way of normalizing ethical AI use. My students were shocked when I first assigned them an assignment where I asked them, I want you to use ChatGPT. They were very confused because they were banned from using AI in a lot of their courses. They wanted to double check. I'm like, yes, I'm not joking. I want you to use it. But one thing here is they need to explain how they used it, in what ways they use it, and even if they don't use it, they need to include this disclosure. And I'm hoping, and I know there is some research in financial accountability using disclosures, acknowledgements, or having that kind of illusion of someone watching you or kind of disclosing that information may be sort of a psychological deterrent for you to be more pro-social. I don't know the empirical evidence on that, but again, without really effective ways of proving or producing evidence that students use AI, we have to rely on these kind of experimental approaches. So when I also introduce these AI policies, I try to engage in this ongoing dialogue with students, a trust-based dialogue around the importance of using AI ethically. So here I introduce this concept of AI literacy versus AI dependency. In most of my classes, I spend almost one class, a lecture, or sometimes a series of lectures talking about what AI literacy is and why they should strive for AI literacy while avoiding AI dependency. And I try to kind of portray this as a new core job readiness skill. So students may want to just simply rely on AI, but I try to emphasize that in the real world, once they graduate, when they deal with real life problems, they really need to bring skills beyond just using AI, because everyone will be able to use AI. But those who can combine effectively their own critical thinking skills or subject matter expertise along with effective AI, use skills, will kind of replace those who simply rely on AI. And I always try to tell them, today more than any other time, you need to learn, how to think, how to creatively think, how to critically think. More than any other time, you need to build more expertise, because if you can just do AI level work at this point, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to cut it. So these are the kind of discussions I have with students. And I introduce assignments. Again, as I walk them through them, I try to explain why they shouldn't use AI for this part of the assignment, while they should use AI and try it out in other parts of the assignment. I also try to role model ethical AI use by disclosing to students how I use AI in my own lesson plans. For example, when I share a course activity or an assignment, I may have an AI use disclosure saying I collaborated with Claude to create this activity. So students seeing me disclosing that information kind of makes them feel a little bit better about disclosing their own use of AI. So the second thing is, I mentioned, AI literacy, a need for faculty and student training in AI literacy. Unfortunately, all these tools have been just unrolled and dumped on us without our control in such a rapidly, fast-paced way. And I think the creators did not really know what they were good for, but we are the use cases in a way. We are trying to figure out. There is no user manual, and we're trying to integrate AI into our classes while we don't really know much about it. So I definitely sympathize with faculty who feel overwhelmed. That's why I started my own like AI for higher ed project, because one night I couldn't sleep and I was like, what am I gonna do like once the school starts, because I'm freaking out and I don't know where to go. Right? So we need to train ourselves about the capabilities and limitations of AI so that we can teach these. I feel like this is definitely our responsibility as faculty members. No matter what our relationship is with AI, we may hate it, you know, we may have this toxic relationship, we may be very critical, but it's our, I think, ethical responsibility to our students who will work and live in a very AI-infused world to teach them what they can do with AI and what they can do with AI. I think effective prompting skills will go under AI literacy as of now. I don't know if they're going to be as relevant in a few years. I hear that, you know, ChatGPT is already trying to create an interface where students or users will not have to have, you know, advanced prompting skills. But as of today, we still need to teach them how to effectively, you know, prompt AI, because it's, I know they use the word prompt engineering, but I feel like there is a formula. As you gain more experience, you get better at it. We definitely always bring ethical considerations for AI use to the discussion. I include, I'll show you guys how I do that, and also critical evaluation of AI outputs. These are all together kind of make up the gist of AI literacy as a concept. So one way one framework I use and started with actually is Ethan Malick's 4 Rules for Co-Intelligence. Ethan Malick has been a pioneer in the use of AI in higher ed. He definitely embraces AI and uses AI in a lot of his courses, but I also see him as more critical with AI than a lot of pioneers in like edtech, you know, landscape. So he definitely discusses or shares research that shows the limitations of AI or why we should be kind of cautious about certain capabilities. So the first thing is inviting AI to the table. So I try to use a lot of different kinds of AI tools just to familiarize myself with them. You know, most people only focus on ChatGPT, but there's so many other LLMs that I may definitely convert to Cloud at this point, for example, or other tools we can use, but we need to see what we can do with AI kind of like for different purposes. Principle 2 is about being the human in the loop, and he really emphasizes the importance of bringing human oversight and critical thinking skills. You can't just like prompt AI and use the raw output as it is. You always need to enhance it, you know, verify it with your own kind of like, you know, human values or critical thinking skills. The third one is related to prompting. Treat AI like a person. We know treating technologies like humans or attributing human-like features can have a lot of detrimental effects on users. However, here he means that we need to really specify our prompts, assign AI a persona, give very, you know, specific step-by-step instructions as we prompt them. That's what it means by treating AI. If we want to treat AI as co-intelligence, right? It's like a collaborator or like a team member. And finally, which kind of sometimes both makes me excited and depressed, we need to assume that this is the worst AI we will ever use. So again, maybe in a couple of years, we have to, you know, delete this speech and like do a new one or add on to it. But this is gonna be the worst AI that we will ever use. It's only gonna get better. So it's also important to, I think, adapt to these changes and stay kind of up to date with their applications, research. I think that's what it conveys. So how do so my practices for integrated AI literacy. First of all, I integrate AI literacy skills into all my courses. So one of my course learning objectives is teaching students AI literacy skills. And there are so many ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be a specific, course on AI. And I experiment with AI enhanced learning activities and assignments. I took some of my traditional assignments and I thought about how I can integrate AI here, or why I should integrate it. Or I took a lot of my writing assignments and I tried them with AI and see that, okay, AI can write this pretty well. How can I change this so that students, first of all, I feel like it's too much to ask also students to be like, I know AI can do this, but don't do it. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I know we want that intrinsic motivation from students, but can you imagine, like when we were going to school, there is this tool that can write better than me almost, but I'm asked to write this paper. I mean, it's very tempting. So I think it's also our responsibility as professors to revise some of those, assignments. So here I wanted to share this, kind of like a resource hub I created one of those nights when I was like freaking out. I was like, what are we gonna do? There's no training. So I started to consume a lot of information, all the, training videos and, seminars. So I started to build my own kind of, resources. So I compile sources from credible, practitioners or kind of pioneers in the field. I also share my own work. I think this is a time where we need to all share what we're doing so we can kind of like build on each other's work. So if you guys are doing cool stuff and, it can be a little activity or a little assignment, feel free to send it to me and we can feature it on the website where everyone can benefit from it. So this is again from the white paper. They emphasize the importance of, we already educate students about digital literacy, but now we need to include information about, limitations of GPTs or, their capabilities. So just to give you some examples from my my classes. For example, in my research methods course, I used to do this lecture on theoretical significance and social significance. Students were, learning how to write a theoretical rationale for a hypothesis or a social significance statement for a research study. So traditionally, I will have them go do like Google Scholar research or like a databases to come up with some communication theories or read up on them, try to familiarize yourself. So this time, I had them do AI-based research. So again, there are some AI research tools, Perplexity, Elicit, Consensus. These are all AI-powered research tools, similar to Google Scholar, but using AI. And then they had to write, that's also part of every assignment where AI is integrated. I have them write a critical reflection. It doesn't have to be a long, kind of like paper, but critically reflecting on both their experience with AI, how they prompted it, what they learned from it, what it did well, what it didn't do well, and also what they added to what AI produced. Some limitations of AI, they observe, maybe some biases in the output, those sort of things, just to familiarize them with, using these tools. And this was a really interesting activity because students will find some articles through like Perplexity, a lot of them use, and then they will go try to verify the source because we know that AI hallucinates. And I told them, look, there are a lot of sources you may find, but you need to make sure that they exist. And when they did this kind of cross-reference, checking, they found that definitely they sometimes made up, sources, but a lot of the times the sources were from Wikipedia, for example, or some other website out there, even though the prompt asked specifically generate peer-reviewed articles or like find sources, or the titles were wrong, the names of the authors did not make sense, there was a lot of inconsistencies in the publication dates. That was such an eye-opening experience for students. And for me too, I'm like, oh, you didn't know? Like, this will happen? They did not know. They did not know that AI will hallucinate and will make up stuff or give inconsistent, because they treat it like Google or like Google Scholar. They don't know that, it may give them wrong information. And for the information tech and human comm class, I revised this class completely and I integrate a lot of AI modules to it. And here, to teach students prompting skills, I do this activity, and you can do this in any class you do. I ask them, working with AI, to create a lesson plan to explain a communication concept or theory to middle school students. For this specific one, I also ask them to create visuals, so they will use some image generation, AI tools too. And you will be surprised how students are so quick to go and try things. I think it's us, older people who are more like, oh my gosh, we need to walk them through these tools, how to create step-by-step instructions. They're like, yeah, I did this on Midjourney or DALL-E. They will be really quick on, they're very tech savvy. So, and they are excited about those things. But again, the critical reflection part there is having them critically analyze how good the output was, how well or how accurately AI explained this concept. Did it actually make it more suitable for middle school students? If it didn't, how can students modify it or enhance it? There is always this critical reflection component, reflecting on both. I think it gives them an opportunity to synthesize or integrate their course learnings, and also reflect on working with AI, and also critiquing the limitations and capabilities of AI. Okay, so the last thing that the third one is need for integrating both formative and summative assessment. So one thing that really frustrated me when I was hearing all the edtech, people saying you need to, give up on tests. You just have to have project-based learning. If we're all teaching at UMass Boston, I don't know how many courses you teach, how many students you have, and how overwhelming it is to do a project-based learning class with 100 students, or you teach 4 courses, 30 students in each class. I know, because I've done those things. I did flipped classrooms, I did project-based learning, design thinking-based project learning. I love teaching my courses that way, but is that sustainable? I mean, there is so much labor that is created for the professor without, support. Of course, in an ideal world, we all want students to do that, but there are also the realities. That's why I emphasize the importance of still including summative assessments, but making them good, definitely. There is a way to do it. So in terms of, I include hands-on experiential assignments. They don't have to be a semester-long projects, but they can be based on a weekly class lecture. Again, there is always a critical reflection component to these assignments, and there is always evidence for AI interaction logs. So that's one thing that I added to my courses. I need to not only evaluate the content of the assignment, but also evaluate how they interacted with AI, looking at their interaction logs, which may be time consuming at the beginning, but once you get used to it, I think it becomes more, it's easier. So the second one is assigning in-class presentations. I teach online too, so a lot of the things I needed to adapt to online formats. That's a whole another discussion. How do we do AI integrations in completely online courses, which we have a lot here. But one thing I did for that one is I had students record presentations, so they had to explain, what they've done, how they did it. So I think these more, public presentations create accountability for self-enhancements, what they added to the AI, and also shows, their understanding of course concepts. And finally, after so many years, I brought back in-class exams. I used to do open book exams 4 years ago with the COVID. This 2 weeks ago, my students did their first in-class. It was a nostalgic moment for me. I'm not gonna lie, I loved it. And also having in-class exams create accountability for ethical AI use in the classroom and for homework. So that's one thing I also do when I introduce or engage in this trust-based dialogue. I tell them, you can do these things with AI, even though I tell you shouldn't. But then if they have to replicate that, kind of learning experience in an exam, it creates a little bit more accountability. They're like, I better work on this independently so that I can produce this work during the presentation or exam. So one of that experiential, assignments was I did in my intercultural camp. I used to have students create an interactive intercultural training activity. So I revised that and I asked them, you need to co-design this with ChatGPT now. For this, they needed to again integrate, effective prompting skills, and they needed to synthesize and integrate course learnings, like course concepts, theories from intercultural communication, when they wrote the critical reflection part, where they also elaborated on self-enhancements, like these are some of the things AI recommended, these are the things I added, this is how I synthesized it. I asked for ChatGPT interaction logs, and also they had to record the presentation, so they had to publicly present, what they have done in this project. So in class exam for research methods, one thing I want to also mention is AI is great for exam review. You have to be, again, careful about the biases and hallucinations, but I've tried out a few prompts. For example, I modified this role-playing prompt and made it an exam review prompt where students can actually use AI as a tutor to study for the exam. And a lot of them actually liked it, and I also used Notebook LM, which is like the latest, you can create a podcast, and I created a podcast for an exam review. And it was pretty accurate, it didn't hallucinate, so I uploaded all my lecture slides, and then students told me that they really liked that they could listen to the podcast. So for the exam, again, as I mentioned before, I agree that multiple choice questions or true-false questions may not always be great to assess comprehension, but I believe that if you create application-based questions and open-ended questions that are more focused on applying the class material or for problem solving, they may be great indicators for students' comprehension. So I try to do that in my in-class exams. They will be very similar to the in-class activities and assignments they complete in class or at home, sometimes with the use of AI, sometimes independently. And then I'm like, let's do them in class now, completely independent and without your notes. Okay, so some of my insights from doing all those things and talking to students, again, reading their critical reflections. It's very interesting that students are very hesitant to use AI for coursework, but when I see why, it's not that interesting because of the discourse around, AI, like we always kind of package it as a means to for like academic misconduct, so they're very fearful of academic integrity violations. I actually, over the summer, Zoomed with a student, and he told me, we were talking about this co-design ChatGPT assignment, and he told me he Zoomed with another professor earlier, and the professor on his screen saw that he was using ChatGPT, and he had to explain to the professor that I wasn't cheating for your class, I was working on another class, and he said I had to send your syllabus to that professor to prove that I was not using ChatGPT. That's the level of also surveillance, like calling out a student, I see ChatGPT on your browser, are you cheating? Maybe both reactions are valid because I understand where they're coming from, but I also try to tell my students, there may be conflicting AI policies. You have to listen to your professors in each class. Again, as I mentioned, these policies will be course specific, instructor specific, and sometimes assignment specific. So students have to kind of like compartmentalize those perceptions. Believe it or not, as much as we do as professors, students are freaked out about AI and their capabilities, and they have a fear of over-reliance too. Like students who wanna, learn and become like critical, creative thinkers, who are knowledgeable, they are fearful that they don't sometimes want to use it because they're scared that they won't be able to think, independently or solve problems independently. The other insight is just doing these activities in class and teaching information tech, class with a lot of AI focus. Students don't have much AI literacy. They don't know the capabilities of AI. They don't know the limitations because they didn't learn before they came to college. We definitely don't teach them because it's so new. For example, they don't have much experience with how to effectively prompt AI. Even with recently, Kadi and I, we were doing the AI hackathons here on campus, and I work with a team of students who are more experienced with AI and they wanna, learn more. When I was sharing some ideas with them, and I could see how they were struggling and they needed to learn more about how to effectively prompt AI to get it to do what they wanted to do. And another important, limitation of AI is the bias in training data, and again, the hallucinations. So unfortunately, a lot of these models are full of inaccurate information, also reflect or take the societal disparities to the next level, and students don't know about that. They may take the outputs at face value, so that's one thing also we need to teach them, that sometimes the AI output will be biased. Sometimes it's not going to be correct and it will be inaccurate. So again, they didn't really know a lot of those. So I mentioned this earlier, but they're very curious to explore AI tools and very quick to kind of, adopt them to do, work. Well, like for exam reviews, for example, they really liked using that for an exam review, instead of like asking questions to me, and they did that too. But they always have that, speaking of the AI making education more accessible, I think that's a great way to use it. And they're also motivated to be part of this discourse around ethical AI use. They are as confused. They don't know if they should use it, if they should, how they should use it. And I know we always have students who will cheat and who cheated in the past. But I also know that I have a lot of students who are genuinely excited to learn, and they want to be better thinkers, they want to be better writers. And honestly, I don't see as much of like AI over-reliance even in my online class, especially when you do these experiential assignments where students have to share real life examples, like what they did, or if they go do an activity and they have to incorporate those. But even those can be done with AI with the right effective prompting, right? So it's like a vicious cycle to think that way, like how are we gonna catch them until we have the technologies that will counter these, we won't. That's why I would love to have a discussion about AI code of conduct, like where we can't even prove anything, but we have these, integrity codes. So that's why I think it's really important to have this trust-based dialogue rather than constantly making accusatory remarks about students or having that kind of mindset. Last thing I want to make here is, as I see a lot of students work, like AI enhanced generated work, I realize even like a stronger need for cultivating higher level critical thinking skills. Sometimes students don't really even know, I'm talking about my students here at UMass Boston, it may be different in other fields, they don't even know how to critique an argument that is generated by AI. And now that we're gonna use these tools and they're gonna generate arguments on their behalf, how do we teach them? How do we make sure that they cultivate those critical skills that are really important to become, more aware of what they can do, what they can't do with AI, or whether AI is, biased or not, and also subject matter expertise. I feel like more than any other time, our students need to read more and learn about the theories or concepts or research unique to their disciplines so that they can use AI as co-intelligence, not as a crutch. So that's what I meant by, I think, saying, AI can be definitely a democratization tool, make learning very accessible, but if you use it without critical thinking skills and incorporating your, subject matter expertise or human oversight, it also can create illusion of learning. It definitely, I think, masks gaps in the knowledge. Because students may think that they learned something, but then, I'm saying this because I see students using AI to complete an in-class activity, for example, and critically reflect on it, but they can't produce the same level of knowledge in an exam or in a public speaking. So what does this tell us, right? How well did they really critique the AI output? How well did they really understood the subject matter and they integrated into their, assignments? Okay, so I talked so much about some of the practices and strategies I implement in my classes, and I wanna conclude my presentation with some of the research findings from this recent research I've been conducting here at UMass Boston with a colleague. So with AI, being integrated into our teaching and higher education, we definitely need more research on how students perceive and react to these, AI-based instructions. So in this experimental study, we looked at there are some studies now that are published that look at students' perceptions of machine-like AI, because AI technologies weren't that great, a few years ago even, and academic publishing can never keep up with the pace of AI evolution. And they compare AI to machine-like AI to humans, or they just simply compare humans with AI. So I was curious how students actually may perceive human-like AI compared to a human instructor. So this is, I think, a very interesting area because I want to show you guys and we manipulated AI or the instructor type using voice, because voice is a social heuristic that helps us make kind of judgments about someone or impressions, and definitely something we associate with humans, human entities than non-humans. So I want to just, hopefully the sound will work, but we pretty much had students in different conditions, and in one condition they listened to this lecture by a human-like AI, and we told them that this is AI you're hearing now. And in another condition, we had them listen to a human instructor and told them this is human instructor. But these were the voices. So this was the human-like AI. I don't know. Oh, is it here?
It's not plugged in.
No.
A speaker or microphone? Both.
How do we?
If you go to the sound in your settings,
okay.
and designate an output.
Okay. Or maybe I should just use my my laptop, because it's going to be more complicated so you guys can hear it.
Hello everyone, welcome to our mini lecture on communication and culture. In today's lecture, I will explain two major cultural value dimensions that shape cultural interpretations and expectations of behavior.
So, do you think this is AI or human?
But you said it was the human level AI.
This one? So this is AI, human-like AI.
Oh my god.
I know. Because this is from 11 Labs. I don't know if you guys tried that. That's like a voice generation, tool. It's incredible how similar, like how organic the human voices, AI voices are compared to, so those like studies that use more machine-like AI, you almost can't find those voices anymore because they're so perfectly mimicking human voices. And this was the
Hello everyone. Welcome to our
sorry. And we had like a instructor just narrate the
Hello
human
everyone.
condition.
Welcome to our mini lecture on communication and culture. In today's lecture, I will explain two major cultural value dimensions that shape culture.
So this was the human. Okay, so I was really surprised, but just telling students that this was AI and this was human, and they listened to them, and actually they perceived the human instructor as more anthropomorphic or higher like attributions of like human-like kind of characteristics, and compared to human-like AI. And which in turn make that instructor appear more enthusiastic and more socially present. And socially present here means that they have a sense of like psychological or cognitive connection with that person, or the feeling of like a shared space. And then this led students to prefer the human instructor over an AI instructor. They reported, more favorable intentions to enroll in a class with the human instructor compared to AI instructor. I mean, we need to do more data analysis. We had like 94, students for this, but I was kind of like pleasantly surprised that despite how literally the AI voice sounds like human, they still perceived and rated this as, again, these were like random assignment to, experimental conditions. They still did not see this as human-like as they saw like a human instructor. So some of the ways we kind of, sorry. And when I look at the literature, I see that, we can maybe use this extension of computers, our social actors framework. CASA framework traditionally argues that humans mindlessly transfer social scripts from like human interactions to non-human entities like technologies, chatbots, and they mindlessly, interact with them as if they are humans, like saying thank you or please to, Alexa will be like a prediction of CASA. But a more recent work by Gambino argues that our relationships with technologies have changed. Like we don't only, integrate or interact with like text-based or computers anymore. They're very human-like. We have more experience communicating or interacting with these technologies. And it's possible that humans are actually developing and applying human media social scripts to AI instructors rather than, mindlessly transferring human-human interactions. So another study by Spence found that when students interacted with the AI teaching assistant, they perceived them or rated them less favorably compared to, a human teaching assistant. So one kind of like theoretical explanation they had was maybe students, rather than mindlessly implementing these social scripts, they're mindfully recognizing that they're engaging with a machine, because they may not know how this is biasing their perceptions, but they know that they are interacting with a machine and they're formulating their perceptions and judgments based on that, rather than mindlessly thinking, oh, this is like sounds like a human. So that's one thing, but we also don't know in the future, maybe students will develop their own scripts with AI as they become more human-like, they will interact with them. They may start to feel like they can connect with them, or they may start to see them more, enthusiastic. But their current impressions of AI may be based on or maybe less favorable because of their previous human instructor experiences, right? We also tend to be connected to people or entities that we feel like we're similar to, and just simply knowing that that was an AI may have made them feel like they're less enthusiastic, they're going to be less connected to me. But still, I think this finding kind of like challenges this prevalent narrative about AI being the future of education and students will be replacing human instructors with AI instructors readily and very quickly, and they will be okay with it. Maybe not. Maybe they will still want us to stick around. So we need to do more research on these topics. And as I conclude, I want to, leave you guys, as I mentioned, a lot of philosophers here, a lot of, more questions than answers as I learn more about these technologies and experiment with them more. And maybe we can share notes about these things as we move forward. I mentioned before, again, I do these practices and experiments, but we need to think about some effective ways to encourage ethical AI use in the classroom without being punitive with our students. And we need to find ways to measure their efficacy. Are they really being effective or not? And I think similarly, the impact of AI-enhanced assignments on learning outcomes. Yes, we're incorporating them into our classes, but how are they aligning with our learning objectives? Are students really learning? Are they learning better than they used to? Or are they not? Are we actually using AI to mask the knowledge gaps in their learning? I think this is another very prevalent question, I think, in the realm of higher ed, especially raised by, again, users of AI, but more critical users of AI. How do we balance desirable difficulty in learning with frictionless AI? Because a lot of the AI technologies are designed to reduce the friction between the user and the interface. But is that what we want in our classes? Because as professors, we sometimes want to introduce challenging tasks to our students, because by completing those challenging cognitive tasks, we believe that they learn the material, and it's a more long-term, more kind of like a sustainable learning. But when we take out this like desirable difficulty in the learning process, what happens? I think that's like an important question to ask. And the last one is, again, I'm so happy we're doing these talks and sharing these ideas. And as I mentioned, a lot of these practices are based on the current, AI technologies, recommendations from, publications or research findings. They definitely address like current technologies and capabilities, but how do we adapt our teaching methods while AI systems rapidly evolve? And it's really hard to keep up with the pace. So what kind of approach can we take? I think at the more individual level, but also institutional level. And last thing I want to tell you, no matter how freaked out and nervous and excited and so many complicated emotions I have about AI, I'm also excited that we're witnessing this historic moment. It's really historic. I remember the first time I logged into, I remember the very first time I went to internet cafe, and chatted with someone online, it was like mind-blowing to me. I remember the very first time I got my iPhone here, and I was like, incredible. And now this, no matter how disruptive it is, I think we also need to reflect on as faculty members that were experiencing, witnessing this historic moment in both the evolution of technology, but also in higher education. And this is, again, I hope is the first of many conversations we will have together. I'll be happy to really connect with all of you guys again, maybe ponder some of these questions and share, our experiences, vent, that's like important. So you can either connect me, email me, or we can connect on LinkedIn or on my, again, the website I created. But thanks a lot. Yes.
A decade ago, there was a lot of enthusiasm for massive online courses that people thought might make higher ed cheaper and education more accessible, and then didn't really go very far. Are you as or more enthusiastic about the capacity of these tools to expand access to higher ed, or is that not
I hear that a lot, in a very techno-optimistic approach from especially educational, tech people and companies or thought leaders. I think AI will definitely benefit contribute to personalization of education, but we're not there yet, so that's always packaged as one contribution of AI. It has to be incorporated into the learning management systems. There is all kinds of privacy, intellectual property issues. So if it's used, benevolently and ethically, I agree it can be a great resource in terms of making education accessible. But I also feel like we need to talk about the value of education now. What are students trying to learn here, or for what purposes? And then it's more affects the jobs that they're gonna do. Are they gonna need these skills to do certain jobs, or are those jobs are gonna be there? So it's gonna be much more disruptive than online learning, in my opinion. But again, I see these as a a co-intelligence toolkit. It's gonna be up to humans and policymakers and technology firms to shape that future.
Great.
Other questions? Anything you want? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
gave
welcome.
Me so much.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear.
My name is Denise Patman, and I'm in the College of Education and Development. I've been here also.
I think I met you at the mid faculty
that's right.
career. Yeah.
That's right. So I have one question about the differentiation between the critical reflection and the interaction logs.
Yeah.
Is one for subject content and the other? I just needed a little.
Yeah, that's a good question.
On
So one thing is, when you prompt AI, you have to have this prompt where you give it a task, give it a context and constraints. And if you do that for a class assignment, that prompt should definitely include information from the course readings. For example, if let's say this is an example, my students, they will be explain, technological determinism to me, okay? So that's a very broad, prompt. But if they were to say, consider the effects of video games on students or individuals, there have been a lot of mixed findings about that. If you were to reflect on, X or Y effect of video games through the lens of technological determinism, what will be 3 specific arguments you will generate? So that shows me more critical thinking than the first one. And I look at the interaction logs. If they just simply use one sentence or one word prompts, that shows me that they're not really using what they learn in class to prompt AI, or they're not reflecting on the AI output to make it better or revise the, they should be able to say, I see you applied, technological determinism, but the examples are not concrete enough, something like that. Like, I think maybe prompting is not the right word. We need to say they need to engage in this dialogue with, conversation with AI in a way. But students, again, it's a new tool. They're not used to it, so they're like asking a question. It's like a Google, like 2 questions and that's it, and they will like include that information. But that's what I meant by when I see students do that, because I definitely see some students engage in this dialogue and making the output better with every iteration, shows me that they're thinking more critically.
And the reason why I teach a course that's entitled Advanced Dissertation Seminar.
Yeah.
And so last year, for the first time, I assigned the use of AI, well, GPT, to call chapter 2's lit review.
Yeah.
So that and now, listening to you, I'm thinking about how can I better frame that so that some students were deeply engaged and were following how their prompts were developing and others, they hadn't made the connection yet. And so I was really after how best to.
I think one way is you can show them how you prompted, like you create those prompts and they have to model after those prompts, because there is a formula, but I think as you experiment or talk with AI more, you realize how much better you can get with your instructions. And I think we're at an advantage here as professors, because we write instructions, right? So we're good at those, and we're very good at explaining assignments to like as if a 5-year-old can understand. That's what exactly they need to do, but they're not very experienced in that, so they're having a hard time. So that's one thing I can, suggest. Yes?
I know I'm a student, so I'm not necessarily the intended audience.
I'm so glad you're here, though.
But I just wanted to say, like, I'd be very interested to take a course framed that way, because I've never done that before. And then also thinking about AI instructors. I know personally, half of having a person instructing you is just knowing that they have this education that I don't have yet. It's like it's the personal knowledge of the fact that they have worked to get here. They have done the education to be at this point where they can teach me. And so it's not only the content, but it's also like the knowledge that they have this work
experience, sort of,
and the AI just doesn't have experience. There's no background.
Isn't that
So that's very cool. And I agree with you that a lot of students will share that perception. In my technology course, I have my students engage in conversations with personal AI companions like Hume and Replica, but they also first read articles on, AI authenticity, how AI attachment, and like how it's problematic, especially for, vulnerable humans. And then they interact with those tools, and you will be surprised how different the interaction style is compared to ChatGPT or Claude. Very human-like, very creepy in a way. And they will say stuff like, I know, right? Like, I spent so much time on Instagram too. It just really is not, I need to get rid of that toxic relationship. And my students are like, and they write critical reflections, and they're like, if I did not read the articles, I would almost feel like, oh my gosh, this is so real, and I could get carried away. But now that I know that it's just programmed to interact with me that way, it's really creepy. And I know that they don't have those human experiences, so I don't actually see it as an authentic relationship. But they also recognize how this can be very enticing and problematic for a lot of people who may not know that, experience or knowledge. But thanks a lot for sharing. And Yeah, spread the word among your. We're trying to teach you guys these. Yes?
Well, I think this question relates to something I'm very interested in, which is that there's a lot of research now on when people trust the AI versus the human. And in a lot of circumstances, they're finding what you implied, which is, I don't know what you implied, which is that you want a human with human insight as opposed to a machine for certain kinds of things. But there's a recent study about conspiracy theories that found that the AI was able to convince people to change their mind about conspiracy theories better than the humans.
I think I saw that, yeah.
And it made me think about the fact that, if we're implying that machines are just a bunch of facts and human beings are these other complicated things, well, there are certain things that human beings are going to screw up more because they're not a bunch of facts, right?
I know. They may be better at putting together persuasive arguments, maybe. That's
right. And by just avoiding human biases in general.
Yeah.
Just maintaining neutrality enough to be able to
that's a very
them without interjecting some opinion.
Right.
Maybe that's an area where it's an advantage to be to the AI. Like they don't have bias, but they do actually. If we were to know more, they're not neutral at all.
Right.
But in our study, we also had like a source credibility scale. And similar to what you said, which was very interesting, students found AI more trustworthy. Like in this one, the human more trustworthy than AI. And competence and goodwill, they did not really make any. They weren't statistically significant, but they trusted the human AI more so than human-like AI. In this context, I think those things, maybe as you said, are more context-specific too. And I think duration of interaction is also important. Like similar to what I said, students like maybe short-term interactions, they're like, oh, this is weird, creepy. But then people build relationships and social connections to those AI tools, and their perceptions change. You wanna?
Did you try testing or telling people, say that the human was the AI and the AI was the human, and then see how?
No, we didn't.
To that?
But I had a hard time collecting data. If you conduct research here, you know how hard it is to collect. We also had a experimental study where the same study, but it was like blind condition. So I wanna look into that more, like actually without telling them this is AI, what their perceptions are, and if they actually. But my concern is because it's so like similar to human voice, it's almost impossible to differentiate AI voice from human voice now, which is very problematic in terms of AI-based deception. But it will be interesting to do that, just like intentionally deceive them.
Yeah, I think you have to have for that particular study, you have to do proper blinding, or you can't make any conclusions.
Yeah.
It's just your own biases are going to inform your conclusions.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned a couple of times the ethical use of AI.
Yeah.
And maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough, but the only sort of ethical criterion that you seem to raise is around disclosure. And I'm wondering if there, when you think about ethical AI in the classroom, is there more to it than that?
Oh, definitely. So in this AI policy, I mean, it's very vague, right? But I make distinctions between completely ethical and unethical. Like I specify what's unethical. It's never ethical to use AI generated output and submit it as their own work, or even as their not work. Like they're not supposed to use raw AI content. That's unethical. It's like an ethical violation. But I, for example, tell them that you can draft an argument, you can write your argument or like reaction, and you can ask for stylistic feedback, to maybe ask AI to point out loopholes in your arguments. That can be an ethical use of AI. I guess one thing that I'm trying to just like convey in the class is don't use AI generated work and submit it as if it's your own work. That's like pretty clear.
That sounds like
Like the same way
The same way you would treat a
exactly,
human collaborator.
exactly. But it's
Yeah.
more complicated because then where do you draw the line? Because sometimes AI also edits, like you use it for stylistic features, right? Is that your work now? But I mean, I'm just thinking about the future where these tools are going to be integrated into our emails or like Word or, you know, so
Yeah.
I think you guys we can discuss this too. That's why I have an issue with this code of, honor code. Like,
Yeah.
what are the boundary regulations there? Like, what is ethical, what's unethical? That's why I think it has to be a dialogue. And students also need to reflect on, how they use the AI. Did they make, for example, how much of the content came from AI and how much of the content were their original contributions to what AI produced? That can be another, I think, parameter,
Yeah.
You need to add more, like self-enhancements, I call. You can't just like use AI's ideas and submit them.
Okay, thanks.
But I didn't want to show you guys the whole, but I'm happy to share the policy statement I include.
A slightly broader question. First of all, just a comment that you talk about, people needing to become sensitive to the likelihood of hallucination and basically the system lying to you in one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I just, it strikes me as somewhat astounding that we will tolerate systems that lie to us. But that aside, I mean, clearly they have some utility, or we wouldn't, right? There's some utilitarian function there that's saying this is worth it to me somehow. But that sort of led me to a slightly different question, which is when you think about, and this is really, less about pedagogy per se and more about just kind of you as a
person.
Well, as a professional,
Yeah.
as an intellectual, when you think about tools of all sorts, right? There's an argument that there's something lost when you use a tool, right? You lose some kind of skill. I'm wondering if you think about what you're asking your students to do, or permitting them to do, if you prefer, when they adopt AI as a collaborator, what are they losing? Do you think? Is there something that's being lost?
Absolutely. I mean, they are definitely losing that human collaborator connection. If you're not, normally sometimes I will do like group work too, but they can integrate that into, like AI can be in addition to that, group collaborator, human collaborator experience. But more so than that, that's why I'm very skeptical about, like, we're trying these things, but I'm skeptical about, like, as you said, are they really learning? Like, and how are we?
That was your point about.
Yeah, how are we? Yeah, the illusion of learning, or are they? I mean, these are also tools that are notorious for being all cool and like fun. Like you play with them, tinker with them, but what's the real impact on their learning outcomes? And I think we can't have those answers now. We need more, I think, empirical research on measuring maybe comprehension levels of students or how well they do in a project or in an exam while they use AI as a tool in their learning, and a control group where they don't use AI in their learning. And it has to be a very large scale study like that.
So one thing that sort of occurs is that if your student practices collaboration with an AI, are they less able or less effective as collaborators with humans? So is that, if there's something about the human collaboration that's lost? I don't know.
It's different, I think. It's different, but I think we also need to consider that they will have AI collaborators in the future too. So they need to learn how to collaborate with AI. Maybe it's better that they build this. Again, going back to that scripts, they only have human interaction script in a collaboration, but maybe we can give them opportunities to build these AI human interaction script, because they will have to do that, you know, once they graduate. Yes?
I think a related question that I've been thinking about, which is something you mentioned in the presentation, the normativity of directing students to treat the AI like a person and not like a tool. And in my own personal reflection on it, to me it seems like just pragmatically that's a good thing to do, because like when I start interacting with the AI and I treat it not like a search engine but just a person, it'll give better outputs. But then I'm just thinking about other philosophical considerations surrounding that question. You know, you mentioned how in the experiment that you did, they were less enthusiastic about the AI because they knew it was an AI. So if you direct them to treat it more like a person, maybe that'll facilitate more of a connection and enthusiasm with it. But on the other hand, you know, I could see some psychological, philosophical concerns. We mentioned in our, or they mentioned in the white paper that they wrote on chatbot therapy. Just, you know, if it's really just fundamentally a tool and you're treating it like a person, how that could be psychologically unhealthy, similar to other parasocial relationships we already have. But I can see considerations on both sides of it. You know, there's the, you know, if you do treat it like a tool and you get used to dehumanizing something that's human-like, the way that that could kind of affect your interactions with humans. It's kind of similar to a question people raise in like the ethics of video games, right? Where you're like treating a human-like avatar in a non-human way. I'm thinking particularly in an unethical way, right? Anyways, I'm not sure if there's a question there.
More like a comment. It's okay.
I'm just reflecting upon this.
That you made a great point, and in the book also, in those, you know, principles, when it says treat it like a person, is exactly what you say. It's more like merely semantics, because when you prompt it, the exact analogy he uses is treat it like an intern, inexperienced intern that you have to explain every single thing. And I think maybe coders will be better at it, because when you code, you know, you're very specific to tell, or use the programming language to tell what you want it to do. That's why it says it. And I definitely agree with you, and I mentioned it, how it can have a lot of ethical problematic issues when you treat it like a human, or like a human-like entity. And there is already research on even like, you know, mental implications of interacting with AI companions. And there are some definitely moderators there, like people who already feel lonely, who have a fear of anxiety or evaluation, or who actually engage in these interactions for a longer period of time, are more negatively affected, and they are more addicted to, for example, AI companions. But here, you made a good point. Yeah, it's like there is more like a pragmatic approach, but it's also important to consider and be mindful that it's not a, you know, human. And interestingly, maybe when you use, I mean, I think Ethan Malik in this case was talking about more like general purpose, like LLMs, like ChatGPT or Claude, because they already interact with you in a more like task-based, you know, very functional, kind of transactional way. But if you were to, I'm sure you tried them out, like when you do those therapy bots or like companions, they engage in more socio-emotional communication, and then you're almost, as a user, already primed to treat them as humans, which I find problematic, especially if you are already there to depend on that, you know, but as a therapy or like a social support. And also when you think about like all the profit-based design choices, it's a ethical nightmare. I mean,
especially when they like you program, like when they're too good, it's kind of uncanny. But when they're programmed to have, like one of the options on the ChatGPT advanced voice mode, it had verbal crutches, so it'd say, you know, and it really made it appear more human.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Near and then.
I think, so first of all, this was great.
Oh, thank you. So glad to hear that.
I think sometimes maybe we're too quick to accept the argument that the technology is here, whether we like it or not, and there's nothing we can do about it. I think the answer there is potentially more differential by area, whether it's area inside higher education or whether it's areas across different sectors of society. I think it's already here in national security, and there's nothing we can do about it because the risk of, not going there is too great. I think it's probably already here in medicine, and there's nothing to do about it because the benefits are potentially so great that it would be irresponsible not to try. In higher education, I'm really not sure. So consider this as a kind of more ambivalent argument. We are sending out students with some AI chops because we assume that the business world and their future jobs will want that as a basic capacity. Now, at the same time, their employers will also want people whose critical thinking skills have been honed. There's a variety of contexts in which engagement with AI actually degrades critical thinking skills. So, for example, being lost in an epistemic bubble on social media that's generated by AI makes you not hear competing views. For example, the fact that your attention span is shortened by AI-generated algorithms of stuff that's shown you degrades critical thinking skills. For me, maybe the most important one, writing is essentially going to become a rarefied ability that's going to, writing is done basically at the college level. It's a question of one more generation of students, and nobody's going to write in college. It's still the best way that we have to make people think more carefully, stand outside of their own thoughts, arrange their own thoughts, etc., etc. I could totally see like an employer now saying, "Oh my God, how come you're sending me kids who are not, proficient in AI?" And an employer in 10 years saying, "The kids you're sending me are not proficient in thinking. What happened?" And the answer would be, we made them very proficient with AI. There's a general trend in the last 15 years of decline of critical thinking skills.
Already,
Yeah, there's a way in which this can accelerate that. On the other hand, yes, of course, it's true that prompting itself is a critical thinking skill. It's a different critical thinking skill than writing altogether. And as you say, it's going to disappear. The fact that it's going to disappear to me suggests that the economic logic behind the technology is not improving critical thinking, but replacing humans. So I think in higher ed, there's an argument not to kind of become unpleasant with your students and policing, etc. But banning AI is a very easy, relatively, let's say we've solved harder technological problems than banning AI. That should be an option. Like in a humanities class, I see zero reason to use AI.
But if you say you ban it, but how are you not gonna know if students are using or not?
Invest money in software that detects it. It's not hard to do.
But it's not detectable as of now.
Yeah, because we have.
Because I'm so agree with like a lot of the things you say about. I mentioned it. And I don't believe in that, or I'm not like a supporter of like it's here, so we better get on with the program. I am very. I definitely use it and integrate it, but I am also asking the exact same questions. Are we teaching critical thinking skills now by looking at students' prompting skills? Are we evaluating critical thinking now, looking at their self-enhancements to AI output?
Look, if we could technically invent a machine that sounds indistinguishable from humans, I'm pretty sure we could invent a machine that could detect a machine that sounds indistinguishable from humans.
That's a question I had actually. To what extent is that technical fix even possible? I know they're working on watermark stuff where just anything AI generated is automatically
and there's also less fancy, you can come up with prompts that you can't do with an AI that are not, that those are probably temporary.
Yeah, they get incorporated in the world.
I feel like it's also adds so much more work to professors, in terms of now you have to find, because this is also an option, creating AI resistant assignment and then creating AI enhanced assignment. and then I can, diversify the examples. So what do you do in an online class? What would you do in a,
Right.
like, is online education dead?
Yeah, it's a great
Or
question.
hybrid? Like, because I will listen to a lot of webinars and I also share these examples with you. I'm lucky because I'm teaching a course on AI online.
Yeah,
But if I were to teach
right.
a writing class or like a history class,
Exactly.
or, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole,
look, we definitely.
it's just, these are very hard questions. That's why I wanted to like come and talk to you guys
Yeah.
too, because I don't have the answer. I have more questions than answers. But going back to what you said about, I don't think, personal for me, I'm not necessarily, I would advocate that I'm making students AI proficient so that they can go. It's actually a more balanced view. That's why I mentioned, yes, we can teach them prompt engineering, those are these courses now, you can use AI. But I think we need to also encourage this culture of learning for the sake of learning.
Right.
Like you said, critical thinking, subject matter expertise, and then having AI proficiency will benefit them. Then those employers will not say, I mean, they can think independently, they can think creatively. I can prompt AI to do this too. But how do we cultivate that kind of culture now?
Yeah.
That's
No,
definitely
I'll
where
tell
I
you-
am.
I'll tell you a funny story. So the student who was here earlier is a student of mine, and she's in a class where we're studying an 18th century text. The whole seminar is on that text. And I was very tempted, and this is already possible, to take that text, because it's hard for them. 18th century English, and the ideas are hard, it's weird. I was very tempted to take that text and a bunch of secondary literature, good secondary literature on it, and put it into Notebook LM, and to make a chatbot out of the thinker. You could make a Play-Doh bot or whatever. And I think that would be engaging, actually, and I think it would actually probably promote critical thinking. And I think more students were, as it were, would be like conversing with the text. I guess the reason I didn't do it, except from laziness, which is not insubstantial, is that do that a couple more times, and how many people are going to read this book?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if I know for myself, if I could chat with a Kant bot instead of reading Kant, I probably would, because he's unbearable to read. But it's probably a good idea, anyway, to try to read something unbearable.
And I mean, that's what I meant by this desirable difficulty, right?
Yeah,
You introduce desirable difficulty by assigning the book, not summary of the book.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we already know students don't read as much as they used to. I mean, going back to the critical thinking levels, reading is also on a downward spiral.
That's right.
Not only our students here, but in like even Ivy League colleges, students don't read their assigned course readings now. So I don't know what to blame on it, but and now with AI, I agree with you.
Putting on my university administrator hat for a second, there's this thing called learning outcomes assessment, and where we could easily, or we could potentially study the effects of different kinds of pedagogy on learning.
Right.
And so it's an empirical question. And you're saying, there's already studies saying it's bad for critical thinking. I've seen some of that.
I didn't say that. I said there's studies that critical thinking is declining.
Critical thinking is declining, for sure. And there are studies that show that poor students in classes are benefited from using AI tools, and then when those AI tools go away, they didn't learn the skills that they needed to learn. But it just reminds me that, over the last 70 years, we figured out how to incorporate calculators into math education. And I'm sure people were saying the same thing about them at the beginning, that kids aren't going to learn to read and divide, or add and divide. But we figured out how to do it, and I don't think the mathematicians are worse off today for having.
I guess that's the question, if that analogy holds. Are these like calculators?
Right.
Because I think they're not.
I guess, maybe I think the multifacetedness of the system is maybe different in terms of calculators. It's an analogy that's widely used, but to know that AI is going to infiltrate all aspects of our lives, like you mentioned, like information ecosystems and higher ed here. I'm sure I agree with you. I'm sure we will thrive and we will adapt. But again, we're at the very early stages of this evolution. That's why I meant like historic, and we don't know what the future holds. And I feel like there is a disconnect as usual with the technological companies or like experts, educators, and researchers. I mean, I'm sure there may be tools that can be modified or created that are more conducive to using in higher ed, but we're trying to use a general purpose tool and adapt it to higher ed, which is difficult to do, I think, because they weren't really designed for education. Like, they weren't designed necessarily to improve critical thinking. That's what I mean, like frictionless. They are designed to make information accessible very quickly in a very frictionless way. And now we're trying to introduce these artificial frictions as like faculty members. We're trying, like, it's on us.
Mm-hmm.
Or you, or not, or you don't, or ban it, and it's easier maybe.
But well, I would argue. So I'm from industry, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that it wasn't designed for anything other than the fun of designing it. It was an experiment. It was essentially an academic experiment done in an industrial lab, or a whole number of industrial labs, as part of the pursuit of a broad and amorphous research program that started 70 years ago. And what you'll see in the business press right now, and even in the financial press, is this particular spin of the wheels instance of hand-wringing over the absence of demonstrable financial benefit from the deployment of these tools in commercial environments.
Yeah, use cases.
Yeah, well, not just that there aren't use
Are you
cases, the
recording
use
this?
cases aren't actually producing any
I think it is.
worthwhile outcome, which, any monetizable outcome. Yeah, right, and that's always the issue, for my first, I don't know, 30 years in the industry,